In the fall of 2023, a girl arrived at a park with her parents and decided to go for a bike ride. However, she did not return, which caused her parents to worry. They contacted the police, who began extensive search operations. Soon, they came across alarming evidence that dramatically changed the direction of the investigation. Ultimately, detectives were able to uncover the truth, and the ending of this story turned out to be quite unexpected. Charlotte Sena was born on September 4, 2014, in the small American town of Greenfields, New York. She grew up in a large and close-knit family with loving parents and two sisters, one older and one younger. Charlotte was an active and cheerful child who loved hanging out with friends, spending time with her sisters, and going on nature trips with her parents. Greenfields, with its population of just over 5,000 people, was surrounded by forests, lakes, and scenic parks, allowing the girl's family to frequently enjoy outdoor activities. On September 30th, 2023, when Charlotte was 9 years old, her parents, along with some acquaintances, decided to visit a national park located about 18 kilometers from their home. The girl eagerly awaited this trip since her friends were also joining, and they all planned to ride bikes around the park. Upon arrival, the girl's parents set up camp, and soon the children went off to ride their bikes. The park had designated circular tracks, one of which was near their campsite. Therefore, Charlotte and her friends chose this track and set out around 6:15 p.m. The plan was to return to the adults before it got dark. After a few rounds, when Charlotte's friends wanted to return, she said she hadn't had enough and wanted to go for another round. Her friends headed back to the camp, while Charlotte went in the opposite direction on her bike. Sometime later, her parents began to worry as Charlotte should have returned after one round, which took no more than 10 minutes, even at a slow pace. However, the girl did not return, and the adults decided to search for her. They walked along the circular track, and around 6:45, they were met with a very troubling discovery. Charlotte's bike was abandoned next to the path, but the girl was nowhere to be found. Her parents immediately feared the worst scenario, that someone had kidnapped their daughter. There were no logical reasons for the girl to abandon her bike halfway and walk somewhere on foot. They considered possible problems with the bike, but it soon became clear that the wheels were intact and the chain was in place. The parents decided not to waste any time and immediately called the police. Officers arrived at the scene about 15 minutes later and began immediate searches. The found abandoned bike led them to a dismal conclusion. Charlotte had likely been kidnapped. However, they did not rule out the possibility that the girl might have simply gotten lost in the forest. So they set out to search. The police cordoned off the entire park and closed it to visitors, also asking everyone to leave the premises after checking and recording their personal information. Some people wanted to stay and help with the search, but without proper organization, this only complicated the police's efforts. They began a thorough examination of every part of the forest. Initially, officers inspected the area along the circular path the girl had ridden on, but they couldn't find any traces. Then they expanded the search area to encompass the entire park. However, covering its entire territory, which spanned about 25 square kilometers, was extremely difficult, taking into account its size. Therefore, the police sought assistance from park rangers, the fire department, and the state police. Later, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, joined the investigation, focusing on attempts to identify a possible kidnapper. They tried to find surveillance cameras near the park and along the adjacent roads. It was clear that if the girl had indeed been kidnapped, the criminal must have taken her away by car. The FBI agents also requested information about all visitors from the Park Service. Each person had to register and pay for the park visit, so their information was stored in a database. However, analyzing this information took a lot of time since the park had a significant number of visitors that day. Additionally, they requested cell phone operators for the location data of all phones present in the park at the time of Charlotte's disappearance. They did not exclude the possibility that the kidnapper might have entered the park by circumventing the rules and not registering at the entrance. In such a case, FBI agents could match visitor data from the Park Service with the location of mobile phones to identify a suspect. However, collecting all these data also took a considerable amount of time. Moreover, this was not about precise tracking using GPS, but rather about estimating the phone's locations via cell towers. The search continued into the late night, but it yielded no results. Early the next morning, officers returned to the park, and even more people joined the search team. In total, more than 400 people were looking for the girl. The police also turned to the public through the media, asking them to share any information that could be related to Charlotte's disappearance. This case quickly garnered widespread attention, and a press conference dedicated to it was attended by the state governor, who came to the park to support the family. That same morning, the police activated the Amber Alert system, which allows for the rapid dissemination of information about a child's disappearance. They didn't use it on the first day due to the need to ensure that the girl wasn't simply lost somewhere in the park. Now it was almost unequivocally clear that Charlotte had become a kidnapping victim, as she would have been found otherwise. Unfortunately, the searches again yielded no results, just as the FBI's attempts to identify the kidnapper. By the evening, the police began to realize that they were unlikely to find the girl alive. In cases of child abduction, the first few hours are critical, and during this time there are high chances of finding the child alive. However, after 24 hours have passed, the statistical probability of a positive outcome drastically decreases, and the search for Charlotte had just crossed this threshold. Yet the police and the girl's parents were not ready to give up. Early in the morning of the third day, they returned to the park to continue combing through it. Meanwhile, around 4:20 a.m., a car approached the Charlotte family's home, from which an unknown man emerged. He walked up to the mailbox, dropped a letter inside, and immediately drove away. A police officer observed this but did not approach the stranger, assuming he was a family acquaintance writing words of support for Charlotte's parents. Over these days, similar individuals had come to the house repeatedly, leaving letters and food. Nonetheless, the officer found the man suspicious. He went to check the mailbox, where he found a note. The contents of the note instantly changed the course of the investigation. It claimed to be from the unknown abductor, stating that he was holding the girl and was ready to release her in exchange for $50,000. The note was immediately sent to a laboratory, where experts urgently began its examination. Soon they discovered several fingerprints and checked them against databases, but one was smudged and no matches were found. Around 2:30, it was time for a second attempt, and the investigators were hoping for a breakthrough. A fingerprint led them to a 47-year-old man named Craig Nelson Ross Jr. He had been in the New York State database since 1999, when he was arrested for drunk driving. Ross lived just a few kilometers from Charlotte's family home, and the police immediately headed there. However, they encountered a problem. The house at this address had recently been confiscated because the man had not paid taxes on it for several years. The police started gathering information on this individual and soon established that he had lately been living in a trailer on the back lot of his mother's property. The woman's home was located 22 kilometers from Greenfields. The police immediately obtained a warrant and went to the location. They deployed helicopters and more than 30 Special Forces officers who surrounded the trailer and burst in using flashbang grenades. Ross, who was inside, attempted to resist but was quickly arrested by the officers. However, there was no sign of the girl, and the officers thought she might not be there. They began to search the entire trailer and looked into a closed cupboard filled with a pile of rags. As the officers moved them aside, they found Charlotte underneath. The girl was alive and immediately ran to her rescuers. She was promptly taken to the hospital for a checkup, and it was determined that she was not harmed. Charlotte received no injuries, so she was quickly discharged and taken home. Her parents, like the hundreds of participants in the search operation, were overjoyed. The girl's relatives were immediately taken to the hospital, where they were reunited with Charlotte. Notably, just 10 minutes before her release, the girl's mother shared with acquaintances a strange premonition. She was in the park where the active search was ongoing. At one moment, the woman said she had a strong feeling predicting that her daughter would return home, and 10 minutes later, the police informed them of Charlotte's release. Meanwhile, detectives arrested Ross without bail and took him in for questioning. Given that this case occurred very recently, the police are still revealing details of their conversation with the kidnapper. However, he did not admit his guilt, so the case will be taken to court. There is information about the suspect and his motives. Ross's former girlfriend told journalists that she had obtained a restraining order against him in 2017. At that time, she lived with him, his 12-year-old son, and his 14-year-old daughter at his mother's house. During an argument, the man attacked her and attempted to strangle her. After that, she contacted the police. According to her, Ross might have been planning the kidnapping for many months. She explained that the man always looked for ways to live off others, trying to rely on his mother, while also playing on people's sympathy by claiming he had a severe illness. Regarding Charlotte's abduction, Ross's former girlfriend suggests that he initially targeted her family for a ransom. Even though the girl's parents were average middle-class people, her late grandfather owned a significant estate. In 1998, he sustained a serious injury and won over $2 million in compensation in a lawsuit against the city authorities. This story is still alive in the memory of Greenfields' residents, although more than 20 years have passed. It is known that Ross's former girlfriend claims he was aware of the compensation payment and likely decided to profit from the kidnapping. Considering that Charlotte was abducted from the park at a moment when she was unattended for just a few minutes, Ross, in his former girlfriend's opinion, might have been observing the family for a long time, studying their schedule, and waiting for the right moment to commit the crime. Another fact voiced by the former girlfriend is that several months before the abduction, the man covered all the windows of his trailer with tarps, which he had never done before. Given that Charlotte was found there, this may indicate meticulous preparation. Ross's neighbors also shared alarming observations. One woman claims that the man tried to take her 10-year-old son, forcing her to intervene. Another neighbor reported that the Ross family had always been problematic, and Ross himself often turned to neighbors for food since childhood. The police also discovered additional information about Ross's criminal past. A year before the attack on his girlfriend, he was arrested for stalking but did not receive severe punishment. Just a month before the kidnapping, Charlotte Ross was a suspect in the abuse of his underage female relative. However, that case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. Reporters also interviewed his son, who was an adult at the time. He stated that he hated his father and wished him a prison death, but did not reveal any details. About a month after Ross's arrest, police made some disappointing statements. In addition to the kidnapping charge, he was charged with sexually assaulting Charlotte. Apparently, while Ross was holding the girl in his trailer, he had time to commit a crime against her, but police have yet to release details. Ross denies guilt on the abuse charges and plans to defend himself in court, despite the fact that the abducted girl was found in his trailer. He has little chance of getting away with it, however, as in addition to the fingerprints on the ransom letter, investigators have found other circumstantial evidence implicating him. By examining the location data of all the phones in the park at the time of the kidnapping, they found that Ross's smartphone was one of them. Thus, there is little doubt that the man is going to jail. However, detectives are now also investigating Ross's possible involvement in two other unsolved cases. In August 2003, an 18-year-old girl named Jennifer Uman disappeared in a town called Milton, where she was selling magazines. Her remains were found near a lake 18 kilometers from the town 6 years later. Interestingly, she disappeared just a few hundred meters from the house where Ross was living at the time. 2 years after this incident, 19-year-old Christina White left a trailer park a kilometer from Milton and disappeared. A year later, police found her remains, but the case was never solved. As for Ross, he was living in the same trailer park at the time. Police are now looking into his possible involvement in the murders. However, so far they do not have any evidence or are keeping it under wraps for the sake of the investigation. As for Charlotte's trial, it is set to begin in April 2024. Despite the presence of irrefutable evidence of his guilt, it cannot be ruled out that Ross may be offered a deal with the investigation. In case he continues to deny his guilt, he will most likely have to appear in court and give all the details of what he did to the girl. To avoid such a traumatic experience for Charlotte, the perpetrator may well be offered a deal. We'll be following the progress of this case.